Today I want to share with you a variation on a timeline that I've used many times to help launch campuses. And I've also seen other churches use this timeline and tweak it for their own uses, but use it to launch successfully. So hopefully we'll give you a timeline, we'll give you some milestones along the way that'll help you as you are getting ready to launch your very first campus. Now the timeline for me is divided up into two sections. The first section is the time leading up to when the clock actually starts. And then the second section starts 6 months before launch, and there's a lot of things that have to happen. So the first part of the timeline might be 6 months or a year or 2 years, depending on your context. But once we hit that second piece, the clock's running. 6 months later, you launch the campus. So in the time before that launch, in the time before that 6 months starts, there's a lot of things you want to get done. You want to get the pre-work done. And by pre-work, I mean you want to do your investigation. Hopefully you've had a chance to read some of the multi-site books that are out there. You're going through this Multisite Master Class. Hopefully you've visited some other multi-site classes, or not classes, churches. Hopefully you also have interviewed some staff at other multi-site churches, and you're doing your pre-work. You're figuring out what does multi-site look like. In one of the other sessions, we talked about what's the right model during this pre-work time. That's one of the questions you're answering. What are the things that we should multiply? That's the type of work you want to do before the clock starts. Now, once you kind of get a picture of what our site might look like and what our vision is, then you begin sitting down with staff and casting the multi-site vision. I find it best to cast the vision one-on-one before you go to a big meeting and cast it to everybody, and sit down with some of the key stakeholders and some of the people that will be impacted the most by a new campus. Now, what you'll probably find most churches do is that some staff is pretty resistant to this idea of becoming one church in multiple locations. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, sometimes some people always resist change, and that's okay. I mean, we need people who love change and resist change and work that tension out. Another reason that you might have some challenges with staff who don't quite understand why we're going there is because they know that they are giving all the energy, all the time they possibly can, especially in a fast-growing environment, and they're thinking, how in the world could we open another campus? How in the world I can't even hardly keep up with what I'm doing now. How can I take care of another campus? And that's a legitimate concern, and you want to work through that with staff, saying, some of this we're going to know all the answers to, and some of it we're going to have to figure out along the way. I know at Seacoast Church, the first multi-site church I worked with, when we began talking to staff and saying, I think we're going to open a second location, there actually was a great deal of resistance to that idea for the same reasons that I've been talking about. So people ask me, well, how did you get everyone on board before you launched that first campus? And I think the reality is you never get everyone on board. But I take some comfort in this. Jesus had 12 disciples, and the best vote he could get was 11-1. So I think if Jesus' best vote was 92%, I'm okay if not everyone agrees with our new idea to go multi-site. But you do want to sit with the staff and not just talk through the logistics, but you also want to talk about the vision and the excitement of what this new site can be, what it can do, and really dig into the why question that we talk about in another session, really understanding and talking through the why. In this pre-6 month window, this build up to the time that starting and rushing toward launch, another thing that you really want to do is figure out who's going to lead this new site. Maybe you're going to call them a campus pastor or a site leader, whatever title it is. You really need to answer the who question of a campus pastor. I've seen churches who kind of start the process going, and they select a location, and they select a site, and they cast vision, and they don't know who the leader is going to be, and now the clock is running and they have to scramble to find a leader. The most important decision you will make, I can't emphasize this enough, the most important decision you will make in launching a new site is who will lead that site. As John Maxwell famously said, everything rises and falls on leadership. In fact, the selection of a campus pastor is so important, we're going to spend an entire session talking about What are you looking for in a campus pastor? How do you identify that? How do you develop a campus pastor? How do you deploy campus pastors? So we won't dive into that in this session, but before that 6-month window, before that clock starts, you want to know who the campus pastor is so that you can begin the process of developing them and preparing them to launch this new campus. A third thing that you want to do before the window gets to that 6-month spot is you want to know where you're going to launch the campus. First of all, of course, the general region where you're going to launch the campus, but more specifically, what building are you going to use? And again, this is an incredibly important and a much harder decision than I thought that it would be. When we first started down the multi-site road, I thought that finding locations would be fairly simple. But what I discovered is it's actually one of the hardest things that we did. You have to answer questions like, are we going to be portable or are we going to be permanent? If we're going to be portable, are we going to be in a school or a theater or a clubhouse or some other environment? Again, I think site selection is so important that we're going to spend another entire session just talking about how do you find a site, what's the best kind of site, how do you decide portable or permanent. But right now, what we want to say is in the timeline, as you're getting ready to move toward launch, long before 6 months before launch, it's very, very helpful if you already have a lease in hand. You already know this is where we will start a new location.